Iran says it fired 4 ballistic missiles at a $4.5 billion U.S. aircraft carrier. The United States says that's completely false. There are no satellite images, no confirmed damage, no independent proof. Just two governments telling two completely different stories. And honestly, the world is trying to figure out which one is true. Now here's the part that really makes this dangerous. In moments like this, truth almost becomes secondary, because the claim itself can move markets, shift military positions, and even shake alliances. Think about what's actually being alleged here. An aircraft carrier isn't just a big ship. It's honestly one of the most powerful military assets on Earth. A Nimitz-class carrier is basically a floating city with a runway. It carries around 90 aircraft, thousands of personnel, enough firepower to strike targets hundreds of miles inland. When the U.S. sails one into a region, it's not exactly subtle. It's a statement. It says, "We're here, and we can reach you." So if Iran really launched ballistic missiles at it, that would be historic. Not just a small skirmish, not a warning shot. That would be a direct challenge to one of the strongest symbols of American military dominance. And even if the missiles never came close, even if they were intercepted, even if the whole thing was exaggerated, the psychological impact is real. Because in geopolitics, perception can be just as powerful as physical damage. If allies begin to question whether carriers are vulnerable, if oil traders think the Persian Gulf is unstable, if regional powers sense hesitation, the strategic balance starts to shift, even without a single confirmed explosion. So what actually happened in the Persian Gulf? Did Iran attempt something bold and unprecedented? Or is this a calculated information move during a moment of chaos? To understand that, we need to rewind a few days, to the event that may have triggered everything. To understand why this missile claim even exists, we have to rewind. Just days earlier, reports emerged that Iran's supreme leader had been killed. If true, that isn't just big news. It's a political earthquake. In Iran's system, the supreme leader isn't a ceremonial figure. He isn't just a president or a prime minister. He is the ultimate authority. He controls the armed forces. He oversees nuclear policy. He shapes foreign strategy. Major military decisions don't happen without his approval. Imagine a country where one person sits at the very top of the military, political, and ideological pyramid, and then suddenly that person is gone. That's not just a leadership change, that's structural shock. Iran's political system is built around centralized authority. The supreme leader is the final word. When that pillar disappears, uncertainty spreads quickly, inside the military, inside the government, and among the public. And in moments like that, regimes face a dangerous problem. They cannot afford to look weak, because when leadership collapses or is attacked, enemies may see opportunity. Rivals may test boundaries. Even domestic factions may start competing for control. So what does a regime under shock often do? It projects strength. It sends a message to outsiders and to its own people that it is still standing, still unified, still capable of striking back. This is where the missile claim starts to make more sense. If Iran believed the United States and Israel were responsible for the supreme leader's death, the pressure to respond wouldn't just be military. It would be political, emotional, symbolic. The leadership vacuum creates urgency. A government in transition cannot appear paralyzed. It must show teeth. That doesn't automatically mean the missiles hit. It doesn't even guarantee they were launched. But it explains why such a bold claim might be made. Because in a moment of shock, visible retaliation can become politically necessary, even if it carries enormous risk. Now the question becomes more technical. Even if Iran wanted to send that message, could it realistically hit a moving U.S. aircraft carrier in open water? That's where we need to slow down and examine the military reality. Now let's step back from the politics and look at the hard military facts. The USS Abraham Lincoln is a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. That means around 100,000 tons of steel, roughly 90 aircraft on board, More than 7,000 personnel when you include the air wing, surrounded by destroyers, cruisers, submarines, and advanced radar systems. This isn't just a ship, it's the center of an entire defensive bubble. And it's not sitting still. A carrier can move at speeds of around 30 knots. That's over 55 kilometers per hour, and it constantly changes direction. Think of trying to hit a moving football field in the middle of the ocean, from hundreds of kilometers away, while it's actively trying to avoid you. Now add another layer. Ballistic missiles travel extremely fast, several times the speed of sound, but speed alone doesn't guarantee accuracy. To hit a moving target at sea, you need real-time satellite tracking to know exactly where the ship is. Over-the-horizon radar to monitor it beyond visual range. Mid-course guidance updates as the missile flies. Terminal guidance systems that can adjust in the final seconds. And protection against electronic jamming, because U.S. warships are equipped to disrupt targeting systems. That's an incredibly complex chain. If any link breaks, the missile misses. Now, does Iran have missiles? Absolutely. Estimates suggest it has thousands, including systems like the Fateh 110 and longer-range variants. Iran has invested heavily in missile technology because it doesn't have a large modern air force. Missiles are its main deterrent tool. But here's the key issue. Iran has demonstrated accuracy against fixed land targets. Air bases, buildings, infrastructure. Hitting a fixed target is very different from hitting a moving naval strike group surrounded by electronic warfare systems and missile interceptors. And then there's the carrier's own defense. The ships around it carry Aegis combat systems and standard missile interceptors designed to detect and destroy incoming ballistic threats. These systems are layered, meaning if one interception fails, another layer can attempt to stop the missile. So when U.S. Central Command says the claim is false and the carrier is fully operational, they're likely confident in that defensive umbrella. Could Iran attempt such a strike? Possibly. Could it succeed? That's far less certain. And here's where things get interesting, because even if the missiles never came close, even if they were intercepted, or even if they were never launched, the story doesn't end there. In modern conflict, what people believe happened can matter almost as much as what actually happened. And that takes us into a different kind of battlefield, one where narratives move faster than missiles. Because this may not just be a missile story, it may be an information story. Right now, there's no independent satellite imagery showing damage. No verified third-party confirmation. Just two powerful governments making opposite claims, and millions of people watching it unfold in real time on social media. This is what modern conflict looks like in its early stages. The first battlefield isn't always land, sea, or air. It's perception. In the past, you might wait days or weeks for clear evidence after a military event. Today, within minutes, statements go live. Screenshots spread. Analysts speculate. Markets react. And here's the important part. Even a claim, without proof, can have real-world consequences. If traders believe the Persian Gulf is becoming unstable, oil prices can spike within hours. If shipping companies sense higher risk, insurance premiums for tankers rise. If military planners think escalation is possible, they reposition assets. All of that can happen before a single confirmed photo appears. Information moves faster than missiles, and in moments like this, uncertainty becomes a weapon. Iran may understand that simply claiming to strike a U.S. carrier forces Washington to respond, even if the response is just a denial. It injects doubt into the conversation. It creates headlines. It raises questions about vulnerability. Meanwhile, the United States has every incentive to project calm and control. Admitting damage, even minor damage, would shake the perception of dominance that carrier strike groups are built on. So both sides are fighting, not just over steel and radar, but over narrative. Who looks strong? Who looks credible? Who looks in control? In modern geopolitics, shaping the story can be as powerful as shaping the battlefield. And that leads to a deeper question. Why target the aircraft carrier in the first place? Why choose that symbol? Because this isn't just about hitting a ship, it's about challenging what that ship represents. An aircraft carrier is not just a warship, it's a message. When the United States sends a carrier strike group into a region like the Persian Gulf, it's doing more than moving hardware. It's projecting presence. It's saying, we can launch air power whenever we want, wherever we want. Think of a carrier as a floating air base that doesn't need permission to exist. It doesn't rely on foreign soil. It doesn't need host nation approval. It brings its own runway, its own defenses, its own supply chain. That's power. And more importantly, it's visible power. For decades, U.S. carriers have symbolized dominance at sea. They represent reach, deterrence, stability, at least from Washington's perspective. So if you want to challenge that dominance, you don't necessarily have to destroy the carrier. You just have to challenge the idea that it's untouchable. That's why anti-carrier missile development has become such a focus globally. China has invested heavily in carrier-killer ballistic missiles. Russia has emphasized hypersonic systems designed to threaten naval groups. The goal isn't always to sink a ship. It's to complicate the equation. If carriers become vulnerable, their psychological power weakens, and that changes strategic calculations everywhere. Even a near miss forces questions. Are carriers still safe in contested waters? How much risk is acceptable? Does the cost of deployment outweigh the strategic message? For Iran, targeting or claiming to target where the USS Abraham Lincoln isn't random. It's symbolic. It says, we can reach you. And symbolism matters in geopolitics because symbols influence behavior. Allies watch, rivals watch, markets watch. You don't need to win the fight to change the conversation. And once the conversation shifts, the consequences don't stay military. They spill into something much bigger, the global economy. Because this isn't happening in just any stretch of water. It's happening near one of the most important choke points on Earth. Now let's talk about geography. The Persian Gulf connects to the open ocean through a narrow passage called the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, it's only about 33 kilometers wide. And through that thin corridor flows roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. That means 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil traded globally passes through this single choke point. Imagine a highway that carries 1/5 of the world's fuel, and suddenly people start hearing reports of missiles and naval tensions nearby. Even if nothing explodes, drivers slow down. Insurance costs rise. Supply chains tighten. That's exactly how global energy markets react. Oil prices don't wait for confirmed damage. They move on risk. If shipping companies believe the area is becoming unstable, tanker insurance premiums increase. If insurers raise rates, transport becomes more expensive. If transport becomes more expensive, fuel prices can rise worldwide. And we've seen this pattern before. In the past, Iran has been accused of seizing tankers, allegedly mining vessels, and conducting drone strikes on regional energy infrastructure. Notice the pattern. These actions don't always trigger full-scale war. They operate below that threshold. They create disruption without crossing the line into outright conflict with the United States. This is sometimes called calibrated escalation. It's like turning up the pressure without blowing up the system. Iran doesn't necessarily need to defeat a carrier strike group. It just needs to remind the world that it can create instability in a place that the global economy depends on. That leverage is powerful, because when oil markets react, it's not just a military issue anymore. It affects Europe, Asia, emerging economies, airlines, consumers. The ripple effects spread far beyond the Gulf. And here's something even more important. Iran's message may not be primarily aimed at Washington. It may be aimed inward, at its own people, its own power structure, its own political future. To understand that, we have to look inside Iran itself. When crises like this happen, we often focus on Washington. But Iran's most important audience may not be the United States. It may be Tehran. If the supreme leader has truly been killed, the country isn't just facing an external threat. It's facing internal uncertainty. The supreme leader is the highest authority in Iran's system. His position connects the military, the religious establishment, and the political leadership. Remove that figure, and suddenly the balance between powerful factions becomes unstable. Now imagine being inside that system. Hardliners want strength. The Revolutionary Guard wants influence. Political leaders want legitimacy. The public wants stability. In moments like this, weakness is dangerous. If leaders appear hesitant or divided, rivals inside the system may push for control. That's why projecting unity and retaliation can be as much about domestic survival as foreign policy. We've seen a version of this before. In 2020, after the U.S. killed IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani, Iran responded with ballistic missile strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq. The attack caused damage and injuries, but it was carefully calibrated, strong enough to show retaliation, controlled enough to avoid full-scale war. It was a signal. But this situation is potentially more volatile. Soleimani was a powerful commander. The supreme leader is the top of the pyramid. If there is a real leadership vacuum, the pressure to prove strength increases dramatically. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, plays a key role here. It controls major military assets and has enormous political influence. In times of transition, its voice grows louder. So when a claim like "we struck a U.S. aircraft carrier" appears, it may serve multiple purposes. Show the public that Iran is not passive. Signal to internal rivals that the regime is still strong. Demonstrate to the military rank and file that leadership remains decisive. In other words, the missile claim could be part of a broader struggle over narrative and authority inside Iran. And that's what makes this moment so fragile. Because when domestic politics and military signaling mix together, the risk of miscalculation rises. And that brings us to the most important question of all. Where does this go from here? So here's where we stand. An unverified missile claim, a firm U.S. denial, a destabilized Iran facing internal pressure, a carrier strike group operating in tense waters, a global energy choke point sitting right in the middle, and major powers quietly watching and recalculating. No confirmed explosions, no confirmed damage, but very real consequences. This is what modern conflict looks like before it turns into open war. It starts with signals, a claim, a denial, a show of force, a repositioning of ships, a spike in oil prices. Each side tests the other. Each side measures reaction. Each side tries to control the narrative. And this is the dangerous middle ground. Not peace, not full-scale war, but a tense space in between, where misunderstanding, pride, or domestic pressure can tip the balance. Because here's the real risk. If Iran believes it must prove strength to stabilize internally, if the U.S. believes it must prove invulnerability to maintain deterrence, if allies begin questioning security guarantees, if markets amplify every rumor, then even a small miscalculation could escalate quickly. History shows that major conflicts often don't begin with a single massive strike. They begin with pressure building slowly, signals misunderstood, red lines tested, leaders boxed in by their own rhetoric. The USS Abraham Lincoln is still sailing, aircraft are still launching, but the strategic environment around it has changed. And that leads to the bigger question. If aircraft carriers, the backbone of U.S. naval dominance, are no longer perceived as untouchable, what does that mean for global power in the next decade? Is this just controlled signaling? Or are we watching the first moves in something much larger? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you see this as calculated messaging or a real shift in the balance of power? And if you want clear breakdowns of complex global events without the noise, make sure you subscribe. Because in moments like this, understanding the signals matters just as much as the headlines.